The Note That Stopped Him Cold, featuring Noah Stewart and Victoria Farmer. He wore a coat that cost nothing and owned a company worth everything. No one in the room knew it. That was the point. Noah Stewart had walked into some of the most dangerous boardrooms in the world. Hostile takeovers, regulatory hearings, contract negotiations that could have ended his career before it truly began. But nothing he had ever done required as much nerve as stepping through the polished glass doors of Cashin's Steakhouse, dressed like a man the world had thrown away. His jacket was older than most of his senior executives. The trousers were stained at the knee. His boots had been deliberately scuffed until they looked like they had walked 1,000 miles of hard road. He smelled of rain and concrete and something faintly metallic, a combination his costume consultant had called urban desolation. He had thought that was a dramatic way to put it. Standing now under the chandelier light of Chicago's most exclusive dining room, surrounded by silk ties and diamond watches and the comfortable arrogance of inherited wealth, he understood exactly what she meant. Someone in this restaurant had poisoned the quarterly numbers for 3 years straight. Someone had turned his name into a cover for fraud, cruelty, and contempt. He had come to find out who. He hadn't expected to find her. Victoria Farmer was carrying a water pitcher and moving between tables with the practiced ease of a woman who had learned long ago that efficiency was her armor. She had dark eyes that noticed everything and gave away nothing. The eyes of someone who had survived by reading rooms, not decorating them. When she set the glass of water in front of him, their eyes met for exactly 1 second. In that second, she knew something was wrong. Not with him. With everyone else. By the end of the night, a folded piece of paper no bigger than a matchbook would pass between their hands. He would read 4 lines that stopped him cold. And every corrupt, smiling, well-dressed person in that room would discover that the man they had humiliated, dismissed, and tried to poison was the one person in the world with the power to end them. But before any of that, there was a steak that no one was supposed to survive eating. And a woman who decided, despite everything she stood to lose, that she wasn't going to let that happen. Chapter 1. The jacket had been hanging in the back of Noah Stewart's wardrobe for 37 years. It was jammed behind a row of bespoke suits, wool and cashmere and hand-stitched linen worth more than most people's monthly rent, and it had not moved in all that time. His housekeeper, Elena, had offered to throw it out twice. Both times, he had told her to leave it. He had never been able to explain why he kept it. Not until tonight. His executive assistant, Carolyn, stood near the entrance of his penthouse watching him button the jacket over a threadbare shirt. She had worked alongside him for 11 years and had seen him navigate boardroom coups, hostile press cycles, and the kind of quiet power struggles that never made the news. She had never looked at him the way she was looking at him now. "You could send an investigator," she said. "Someone who does this professionally. Undercover operations require training, protocol. Protocol didn't write me an anonymous letter." Noah checked his reflection in the hallway mirror and smeared a thin layer of grime across his jaw. His stylist had mixed it specially, a combination of chalk dust, clay, and something that smelled faintly of dried leaves. Convincing enough to fool people who weren't looking too closely. Someone inside Cashin's took a risk to get that letter to me. The least I can do is take a risk to find out why. The letter had arrived 8 days ago. No return address. No signature. Just a USB drive, 3 sentences printed on plain paper, and a video clip. The clip showed a man in ragged clothing being dragged through a restaurant lobby by 2 security guards while guests at nearby tables applauded. The sentences read, "This is your restaurant. This is your name. Does it matter to you?" Cashin, Chicago was the flagship location of his hospitality group, Stewart & Sons, 14 restaurants across 4 countries, 3 Michelin stars between them, and a founding philosophy hammered into every staff handbook. Every person who enters deserves to be treated as a guest, not assessed as a client. Noah had written those words himself when he was 29 years old, 3 years after pulling himself out of a situation he never spoke about in public. The Chicago location had been bleeding for 2 years. Revenue down, complaint volume up, staff turnover at a rate that should have triggered an internal review. The regional director's reports blamed it on demographic shifts, supply chain issues, post-pandemic dining patterns. Noah had been suspicious. Now he was certain. He removed his Patek Philippe from his wrist and placed it on the dresser beside his phone. The only thing he kept was a slim recording device embedded in the rubber lining of his left boot. Waterproof, pressure-sensitive, capable of capturing clear audio from 6 feet in any direction. "I'll have the legal team 3 minutes away," Carolyn said as he moved toward the door. "1 word from you and we're inside." Noah paused at the threshold. He looked at the scar that ran along the base of his right hand, pale and raised against his skin, the permanent souvenir of a night when he'd been 23 and hungry and someone with authority had decided to teach him a lesson about knowing his place. He had built everything he had in direct response to that night. Every policy, every training program, every standard of dignity he had embedded into his company's culture, all of it had started with that scar. "If that principle is being violated under my name," he said quietly, "I need to see it with my own eyes." Carolyn nodded. She understood. She didn't have to like it. Noah walked out into the Chicago night. Chapter 2. Victoria Farmer had been long enough to recognize the particular silence that fell over a dining room when something was about to go wrong. She had worked in restaurants since she was 16, first bussing tables for a diner in Baltimore, then hostessing at a mid-range chain, then cooking for a brief and difficult stint that ended when her daughter was born and childcare costs outran everything else. She had landed at Cashin's because the hourly rate was better than anything she'd found, and because the health plan covered pediatric asthma treatment without a referral. Her daughter, Zoe, was 8. Her brother, Darius, was in his 2nd year of college. Between those two facts, Victoria's financial margin was essentially zero, and had been for longer than she cared to calculate. She was refilling a water carafe near the bar station when the front door opened and the man walked in. He looked homeless. His coat was torn at the collar, his trousers visibly stained, his boots splitting at the left seam. He had the kind of beard that suggested weeks, not style. When he stepped into the warm amber light of the dining room, she watched the hostess, a girl named Petra who had only been there 4 months, physically recoil before catching herself and composing her expression into something professionally neutral. But Victoria was watching the man, not Petra. His shoulders. They were wrong. Completely wrong for someone who had been worn down by the street. They were the shoulders of a man accustomed to entering rooms and expecting to be heard. His chin was level. His eyes, even from across the room, moved with a precise, methodical intelligence, cataloging the space, clocking the cameras, noting exits and staff positions. She had seen that kind of deliberate observation before, in people who had been responsible for something larger than themselves. Gideon Walsh appeared within 40 seconds. He was the general manager of Cashin's Chicago, 51 years old, with a kind of charm that worked perfectly in rooms where no one looked below the surface. Victoria had seen what sat below Gideon's surface. She had heard him speak to the kitchen porters when the dining room was empty. She had seen the clipboard he used to track which employees he considered problems. Her name was on it. He approached the man with both hands clasped and his voice lowered to a confidential murmur, the tone of someone delivering bad news he was pretending to regret. "Sir, I'm afraid this establishment may not be what you're looking for this evening." The man reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded stack of bills. He didn't count them out or display them. He simply set them on the hostess stand, smoothed them flat with 2 fingers, and said, "Table near the window. The bone-in ribeye, medium rare. I'll settle the bill before the food arrives." The room went very quiet. Gideon's eyes went to the money. Victoria watched the calculation cross his face, The specific arithmetic of a man who wanted this person out of his restaurant but couldn't refuse paying customers in a room full of witnesses. She had seen that look before. It was the look of someone choosing the slower cruelty over the obvious one. "Of course," Gideon said. He lifted the bills with 2 fingers, as though they might be contaminated, and said, "Right this way." He led the man to table 14. The worst seat in the building, adjacent to the service corridor, positioned directly beneath the ventilation unit from the kitchen, catching every draft and clatter from the back of house. It was the table they used when they wanted someone to give up and leave. Victoria watched the man sit down without a word of complaint. He folded his hands on the tablecloth and looked around the room with the quiet patience of someone who had decided to wait. Her skin prickled. Gideon crossed the floor and stopped beside her. He said nothing for a moment, just looked toward table 14 with an expression that she had learned to recognize as the precursor to something unpleasant. "You're on 14 tonight," he said finally. It was meant as a punishment. They both knew it. "Yes, sir," she said. And she picked up her order pad and walked toward the table, the water pitcher in one hand and something unnamed and uncomfortable beginning to build in her chest. Chapter 3. Gideon Walsh didn't go back to his office after seating table 14. He went to the kitchen. Victoria saw him go. She noted the direction, the pace, and the particular set of his shoulders. Not the relaxed posture of a manager doing rounds, but the forward lean of someone with a task in mind. She filed it away and continued toward table 14, pitcher in hand. The man looked up when she reached him. His eyes caught hers, and for 1 second that felt longer than it should have, she felt something pass between them, a recognition she couldn't name and couldn't quite dismiss. She looked away first. "Water?" she asked. "Please," he said. His voice was low and measured. No trace of distress, no performance of gratitude, no performative humility. Just a man who had ordered water and was now receiving it. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a moment?" "I'm ready." He hadn't opened the menu. The bone-in ribeye. Medium rare. She wrote it down. She said, "I'll put that in." And she walked back toward the kitchen. In the kitchen, Gideon was standing in the far corner near the dry storage shelves, the one spot in the back of house where the ceiling cameras had a blind angle due to a structural column. She had noticed this blind spot 6 months ago. She suspected Gideon had known about it far longer. He was speaking to the sous chef, a 26-year-old named Brendan Hale, who had been at Cashin's for 18 months and whose wife was 7 months pregnant with their first child. Victoria had seen the 2 of them together before in that corner. Nothing good had ever come from those conversations. She moved to the spice station, close enough to hear without being visible, and she began reorganizing the place as slowly as she could manage. "The ribeye for table 14, Gideon was saying. "Use the one that came back Saturday." A pause. "The return from table 6? Brendan's voice was careful. Flat in the way voices go flat when someone is trying not to react. "That cut sat on the pass for nearly 2 hours before I pulled it. I know what it did. Gideon, if the protein temperature crossed the line, then our friend at table 14 will have an uncomfortable evening." Gideon's voice dropped lower, took on a soft, almost pleasant quality that Victoria recognized as the register he used when he was most serious. "He's not going to file a report. He's not going to call the health board. He's going to get sick, decide this wasn't the place for him, and not come back. Problem solved." Brendan said nothing. "You dropped a $2,000 bottle of Barolo last month," Gideon continued. "I told you I'd absorb the cost. I'd hate for that to become a payroll conversation." Another pause. "Do what I'm asking, Brendan. It's just 1 plate." Victoria pressed herself flat against the shelving unit. Her heart was hammering so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. She waited until she heard Gideon's footsteps recede toward the dining floor, and then she waited another full minute before she moved. Brendan was standing at the prep station, staring at the counter. He didn't turn when she stepped closer, but his jaw tightened in a way that told her he knew she was there. "You can't do it," she said quietly. "Sonia," he caught himself. "Victoria. Walk away. That man could end up in hospital. If he has any respiratory issues, any immune." "I have a wife," Brendan said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way that made her stop. "I have a baby coming in 8 weeks. If I lose this job, we lose the insurance. You understand what that means right now. You of all people understand what that means." She understood. She understood it down to the bone. "Fine," she said softly. "You didn't hear anything. You don't know anything." She turned away before he could see her face. "Neither did I." But she already knew that wasn't true. Chapter 4. Victoria stood in the service corridor and counted the cameras. 6 in the main dining room. 1 at the entrance. 2 more covering the bar. Gideon reviewed the footage every night. She knew this because he had used it 3 times in the past year to build cases against staff members he wanted removed. The busboy who had taken an unauthorized break. The bartender who had comped a drink for a regular without approval. The server who had stopped to speak with a guest for what Gideon deemed an excessive amount of time. She could not speak to the man at table 14. Not in this room. She could not go to the hostess station to call anyone. Not with Petra watching. She could not send a text from her personal phone while on the floor. That was grounds for immediate termination, and Gideon would have her phone records subpoenaed before morning if he suspected anything. There was one room in the building without a camera. The staff restroom at the end of the service corridor. Gideon had pushed for surveillance there too, 18 months ago, and the building manager had refused, citing federal privacy regulations. It had been one of the few times Victoria had felt grateful for bureaucracy. She moved through the corridor with her head down, her posture radiating the particular studied blankness of a server on her way to a necessary errand. At the staff restroom door, she pushed inside and turned the lock. Her reflection looked back at her in the mirror above the sink. She was 34 years old. She had dark circles she'd stopped trying to conceal 6 months ago. Her hair was pulled back precisely, the way it always was on shift, because loose hair was another of Gideon's documented grievances. She looked, she thought, exactly like a woman who had been surviving so long that the survival itself had become invisible. She thought about her mother. Her mother had died 5 years ago, and in the last weeks of her life, when the morphine had made her conversational in strange looping ways, she had said something that Victoria had carried with her every day since. She had said, "There's going to be a moment when you have to choose between what's safe and what's right. And I need you to know that they're not always the same thing. I need you to choose the right one anyway." Victoria had been 29 at the time. She had nodded and held her mother's hand and told herself she understood. Standing in a staff bathroom with her heart going at twice its normal speed, she finally did. She pulled her order pad from her apron, tore off a piece no larger than a credit card, found the short pen clipped to her breast pocket and wrote, in letters small enough to fit without crowding, "Don't eat. The meat is spoiled. Someone did it deliberately. Get out if you can." She read it twice. Then she folded it, once, twice, 3 times, until it was a small tight rectangle she could press into the center of her palm without it showing from more than 2 feet away. She ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds. Then she unlocked the door, composed her face, and walked back to the floor. Gideon was standing near the host's stand, speaking to one of the regular guests, a woman in her 60s who wore the same pearl earrings every time she came in. His back was to Victoria. She crossed the room toward the kitchen pass, picked up the plate that had been set under the heat lamp, the bone-in ribeye, seared to a perfect bronze, glistening with herb butter and arranged on white porcelain beside roasted vegetables, and she walked toward table 14. 10 feet. 5 feet. Ugh. She set the plate down. She arranged the silverware. She said, loud enough for the adjacent tables to catch, "Your ribeye, sir. Medium rare as requested. Can I bring you anything else?" He looked up. Those dark, measuring eyes found hers. She placed the folded napkin beside the fork, and as she smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, she pressed the note into his palm. She felt his hand close around it without hesitation, without surprise, as though he had been expecting exactly this. "Enjoy your evening," she said, and turned and walked away. Before we dive deeper into this story, let's see how global we are. Comment where you're watching from and your favorite part of the story. Hit like if you enjoy billionaire love stories. Hit subscribe if you're ready for more drama and romance. This isn't just a channel, it's a boredom pill. Now, let's continue this incredible story. Chapter 5. Noah kept his hand beneath the table and unfolded the paper. He read it once. Then again. Then a third time, more slowly. "Don't eat. The meat is spoiled. Someone did it deliberately. Get out if you can." He set the note on his knee and looked at the steak in front of him. It was a beautiful piece of work, exactly the kind of plate he paid his culinary director to train every kitchen team in his group to produce. The crust was even and caramelized, the herb butter pooled in the center, the vegetables arranged with care on the side. Someone had been taught to do this properly. Someone had then been told to do something else. The cold thing that settled in Noah's chest was not quite anger. It was older than anger. It was the specific feeling of recognition that he had spent 37 years trying to outrun. He was 23 again. He was standing behind a restaurant on a November night with both hands shaking, going through the garbage bins for something edible, and the back door had swung open and a man in kitchen whites had found him there. And instead of calling the police, which would at least have been a recognizable response, the man had gone back inside and come back with a pot of water that had been sitting on the back burner. He had poured it over Noah's hands. He had laughed while Noah screamed. He had told him that garbage was where people like him belonged. The scar along the base of Noah's right hand was not from an accident. He had started Stewart & Sons at 29 with borrowed capital and one guiding principle that was not written into the business plan but was written into everything else. Every person who walks through the door is a guest, not a case study. Not an opportunity for assessment. Not a problem to be solved. A guest. That principle had spread through 14 locations across the United States and Europe. It had won him industry awards that he kept in storage because display cases made him uncomfortable. It had built a company now worth more than he had any rational way to spend. And in his own flagship restaurant in Chicago, someone had ordered a sous chef to serve a man contaminated meat because they had decided, based purely on how he looked, that his suffering didn't matter. Noah set down the fork he had been holding. He wasn't going to eat. He wasn't going to leave, either. He was going to sit here, calm and patient, and he was going to watch. He was going to let the recording device in his boot gather everything it could. And he was going to wait for exactly the right moment. Across the room, the waitress who had handed him the note was clearing a table near the bar. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Whatever she had risked to pass that piece of paper, and he suspected, from the way she had moved, that it was considerable. She had done it cleanly, without drama, without any expectation of credit. He had been in this industry for 37 years. He had interviewed thousands of people. He had promoted and mentored and occasionally fired hundreds more. In his experience, the specific kind of courage required to do the right thing in a room where everyone else had decided not to, that was the rarest quality in any room. He kept his hand still on his knee and his eyes steady on the middle distance. He could wait. Chapter 6. 22 minutes passed. The ribeye sat untouched. From the host station, Gideon Walsh watched with the specific anxiety of a man whose plan was failing to follow the script. The homeless man. And Gideon had never once allowed himself to consider any other category for him, should have eaten within 5 minutes of the plate arriving. Should have been halfway through it by now, already digesting the bacteria that were multiplying in the compromised protein, already beginning to feel the first nausea that would have him excusing himself to the restroom within the hour. Instead, he was just sitting there. Still. Quiet. Occasionally sipping from his water glass. Looking around the room with an expression of mild, unhurried interest, as though he were at a gallery, not a dinner service. Gideon straightened his cuffs and crossed the floor. "Good evening," he said, deploying his warmest register. "Is everything to your satisfaction? I noticed you haven't touched your meal." The man looked up. Gideon had the sudden, disorienting experience of feeling evaluated rather than the evaluator. "The atmosphere is exceptional," the man said pleasantly. "I'm taking my time." "Of course." Gideon's smile held. "If there's anything about the preparation that isn't to your liking." "The presentation is perfect." The man tilted his head slightly. "You run a beautiful room, Mr. Walsh." Gideon Walsh. The name had come out before he'd thought about it, a reflex of vanity that he immediately regretted. "Mr. Walsh." The man's tone was cordial. "You must be very proud of what you've built here." Something in that sentence made the back of Gideon's neck prickle. He couldn't identify what it was. He held his smile and said, "We do our best," and excused himself. He walked directly to the service corridor and pulled out his personal phone. Victoria was refilling water at table 9 when Gideon reappeared at her elbow. He had moved quickly and quietly, the way he always did when he was trying to catch someone doing something he could document. "You've been watching 14, he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been doing rounds," she said. "I've noticed you looking at him. Multiple times." His voice was pleasant. That pleasant register again. "Is there something about that particular table that requires your special attention?" "He hasn't eaten his meal," she said. "I was going to check if he needed anything." "He doesn't need anything." Gideon leaned slightly closer, and she felt the shift in pressure the way you feel a storm system coming. He's going to finish his meal, realize this establishment isn't suited to his current circumstances, and leave quietly. That's how this ends. "Understand." "Understood," she said. "Good." He straightened. His eyes moved back toward table 14, then returned to her. "You have a lot riding on this position, Sonia." He used the wrong name. Whether it was deliberate or simply dismissal, she couldn't tell. Either way, the message was clear. Don't make choices tonight that you can't undo. He walked away. Victoria waited until he was at the opposite end of the room, then allowed herself one slow breath. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what, or how much. She needed him to keep not knowing. She needed about 15 more minutes. Chapter 7. The woman who triggered it was wearing a dress that Victoria estimated cost more than a month of her take-home pay. She was seated 3 tables away from table 14, a position that apparently felt too close, and she had been giving Gideon significant glances for the better part of 10 minutes. When he finally reached her table, she leaned forward and began speaking in the low, precise tones of someone who had learned that a certain pitch of voice carries authority without requiring volume. Her husband, seated across from her, examined his wine glass with the focused attention of a man who wished he were elsewhere. Victoria couldn't hear the words, but she could see Gideon's response, a nod, a turn of the body, a gathering of purpose. She had seen this movement before. It was the movement of someone who had found a pretext. He walked to table 14. "Sir," he said, his voice clipped now, the warmth entirely absent, I'm going to need you to settle your bill and vacate this table. I have other guests who require the space." The man at table 14 looked up with an expression of mild curiosity. "I've paid for my meal," he said. "I haven't eaten it yet. I'll arrange a full refund." "I don't want a refund. I want to sit here." "I must insist." "On what grounds?" The man's voice was quiet. Perfectly, unnervingly quiet. "I'm a paying customer in a public restaurant. I've violated no policy that you've cited. I've disturbed no one. What specific grounds do you have for removing me?" The room was very still. Two nearby tables had stopped their conversations. Someone near the bar had lowered their glass. Gideon's eyes moved across the room and found Victoria. She saw the decision form in his face the way you see weather form on a horizon. "Victoria Farmer," he said, raising his voice just enough to carry. "Come here, please." She crossed the room. She kept her hands at her sides and her face composed. "I've received reports," Gideon said, turning to address not just her but the room, "that you behaved inappropriately with this guest. That you made statements that were offensive and unprofessional." Victoria felt the air change in her chest. "That's not true," she said. "I brought him his food. I said 2 sentences. Multiple witnesses have indicated otherwise." Gideon's voice was regretful now, sorrowful even, and she understood that she was watching a man who had done this before, who had rehearsed this particular choreography of injustice so many times it had become reflexive. "Given the seriousness of the allegations, I'm placing you on suspension effective immediately, pending a full review." The room had gone completely silent. Victoria stood in the middle of the dining room of Cash in Chicago, surrounded by the still, watchful faces of people who had paid hundreds of dollars for an evening of comfort, and she felt the sensation she had read about once, the specific vertigo of being made invisible in a room full of people. From the kitchen doorway, she could see Brendan. He was watching. His face was pale. He knew exactly what she had and hadn't done. He knew exactly why this was happening. And he lowered his eyes and stepped back into the kitchen, and she understood, without anger, that he could not save her. She was going to have to save herself. And she had no idea how. And then the man at table 14 stood up. Chapter 8. She didn't say anything inappropriate. The voice came from the corner table. Measured. Clear. Carrying the specific weight of a man who was accustomed to speaking in rooms where people listened. Every head in the dining room turned. The man in the torn coat rose slowly from his chair, and as he did, something shifted in the room's atmosphere, a subtle but unmistakable pressure change, like the moment before a weather system breaks. "She brought me my food," he continued. "She was professional and polite. Whatever you've been told by whoever told you, it isn't accurate." Gideon's composure held, but only just. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is an internal personnel matter." "You made it public." The man's voice remained quiet. "You announced a disciplinary action in a room with 60 witnesses. That makes it public. If you're going to destroy someone's livelihood in front of a crowd, the least you can do is have the integrity to be honest about why." Gideon took a step toward him. "I don't know who you are." "No," the man said simply. "You don't." And he reached down and removed his left boot. A ripple of confused recoil moved through the nearby tables. But instead of what they expected, the man reached into the sole of the boot and withdrew a slim black device, no larger than a thumb drive. He pressed a button on its side. A small light on one end turned from red to green. "That's a signal," he said to no one in particular. To the vehicle parked across the street. The front doors of Cashin's opened 40 seconds later. A woman entered first. She was tall, composed. Noah Stewart, founder and chief executive of Stewart & Sons Hospitality Group, which is the parent company of this restaurant and 13 others across the United States and Europe. The silence deepened. Somewhere near the bar, someone set down a glass with a small, distinct click. Gideon Walsh stood in the center of the room he had managed for 5 years, in the restaurant he had considered his domain, and watched the floor dissolve beneath him. The woman in the torn dress near table 11 had gone white. Her husband was already calculating. The hostess, Petra, had pressed herself against the wall near the entrance. And Victoria Farmer stood in the center of the room and felt something that was not quite relief and not quite vindication, but somewhere between the two, something she did not yet have a name for. Noah Stewart looked across the room and found her eyes. She looked back at him. Neither of them moved. Chapter 9. I've been recording everything that's happened in this room tonight. Noah held up the device from his boot. The small green light pulsed steadily. Every conversation at the host stand. Every interaction at table 14. And a significant portion of what took place in this kitchen approximately 45 minutes ago, near the dry storage area adjacent to column 7. He paused. Which, I'm told, is a blind spot for your ceiling cameras. Mr. Walsh. Gideon's mouth opened. No sound came out. The device has a range of 22 feet, Noah continued, and the acoustics in a commercial kitchen are, as any chef will tell you, quite good. I heard the conversation about the ribeye that was sent back on Saturday. I heard the specifics of what condition it was in. I heard the reason you wanted it served to me anyway, and I heard the mechanism you used to ensure compliance. He set the device on the table beside the untouched plate. All of that is on record, and my legal team has been monitoring the audio transmission in real time since I sat down. Carolyn nodded toward the two men with briefcases, who set them down and opened them simultaneously on a nearby table. Document cases, not briefcases, thick with folders. Mr. Walsh, Carolyn said, in addition to tonight's events, the forensic accounting team has been reviewing this location's financial records for the past 9 days. The review identified a pattern of falsified inventory reports going back approximately 26 months. Supplier invoices for produce, protein, and dry goods that were recorded at inflated figures, with the difference redirected to a personal account associated with a holding company registered in Delaware. She let that sit for a moment. The total amount identified to date is $412,000. The room erupted. Several guests pushed back their chairs. 3 of them reached for their phones simultaneously. The woman in the expensive dress said something to her husband in a low, urgent voice. At the bar, a man in his 40s waved for the bartender and said, in a voice that was not as quiet as he intended, "Are we going to get sick?" "The food served to other guests tonight is not affected," Carolyn said clearly. "The contaminated preparation was specific to table 14 and has not been consumed." Gideon had backed toward the wall. His face had the gray quality of a man whose body has started shutting down non-essential functions. "This is fabricated," he said, but his voice had lost its shape. "This is... You can't walk in here and make accusations without evidence," Noah said. "We have the recording. We have the financial documents. We have a witness who observed the conversation in the kitchen." He looked toward the kitchen doorway. Brendan Hale stood there. He had not moved since the doors opened. He was still in his chef's coat and apron, his hands hanging at his sides, his face stripped of everything except the specific expression of someone who has been waiting to make a decision they've been afraid to make. "Brendan," Noah said, and his voice shifted. Not harder, something more careful than that. "You have children coming. You have a future that should not include being the man who stayed silent about this. I have the recording. Whatever you say right now, I already have. The question is whether you're going to be on the right side of what happens next." The kitchen had gone silent behind Brendan. Every chef, every porter, every dishwasher in that building had stopped moving. Brendan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked back at him. She didn't nod. She didn't prompt him. She simply looked at him the way her mother had once looked at her, with a quiet, steady expectation that he already knew what the right thing was. He stepped forward. Chapter 10. Mr. Walsh told me to use the ribeye from Saturday's return. Brendan's voice was steady when he found it, steadier than Victoria had expected. It had been on the pass for approximately 90 minutes before I pulled it and put it in cold storage. He knew that. I told him. He said to serve it to the gentleman at table 14 anyway. The room did not erupt this time. The silence was different, the specific silence of a crowd that has heard something it cannot unknow. He said. Brendan paused. He looked at his hands. He said that no one would believe a homeless man if he got sick. He said it would be a lesson for coming in here. 3 people near the entrance stood up. One of them was already on his phone. Another was photographing the room. Gideon made his move. He turned for the exit. Not a run, just a rapid professional walk. The walk of a man who has exited difficult situations before and knows that authority of bearing can carry you 6 steps before anyone reacts. It carried him 4. 2 of the security team had positioned themselves at the doors before Carolyn had finished her introduction. They intercepted him cleanly, without drama, without physical force beyond a hand on each arm and the kind of professional immobility that makes resistance feel absurd. "Let me go," Gideon said. "You can't detain me. This is unlawful." Noah crossed the room and stopped 3 feet in front of him. He looked, still, like a man who had been sleeping on park benches. The torn coat, the worn trousers, the smear of grime that hadn't quite come off his jaw. He was shorter than Gideon by an inch, older by 15 years. He had never in his life needed a suit to fill a room. 37 years ago, Noah said quietly, I was 23 years old and I was digging through a restaurant's garbage because I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The kitchen manager found me. He didn't call the police. He poured boiling water on my hands. Noah raised his right hand and held it where Gideon could see it, the pale faded scar running along the base of his palm. He laughed while I screamed. He told me that garbage was where people like me belonged. Gideon stared at the scar. He said nothing. I built Stewart and Sons because I wanted to build the opposite of that kitchen. I wanted to build a place where the measurement of a person was not their net worth or their clothing or what they looked like when they walked in the door. Noah let his hand fall. You turned my restaurant into exactly the place I swore to destroy. The sirens were audible then, distant but growing, coming up through the street noise of a Chicago Saturday night. The police are 3 minutes away, Carolyn said. Mr. Walsh will be facing charges of attempted food adulteration, fraud, embezzlement, and gross misconduct. We'll be filing civil suits separately, but criminal proceedings take priority tonight. Gideon looked at the room, at the guests, at the staff gathered in the kitchen doorway, at the lawyers and the security team, at Noah, still in his ruined coat, still carrying himself like the only person in the room who was exactly where he meant to be, and at Victoria Farmer, standing in the center of the dining room, in a white button-down that had been on shift for 7 hours, her hands at her sides, her face finally, free of the composed blankness she'd worn all evening. "Who are you?" Gideon said to her. Not with anger. With something that was almost genuine confusion. "What are you?" Victoria looked at him for a moment. "I'm the waitress," she said simply. Chapter 11. The police arrived in 2 units. They took Gideon Walsh out through the front door in handcuffs, which Victoria watched through the window of the dining room as the last of the guests filed out behind him. The staff were sent home with full pay for the evening and a message from Carolyn that a representative from corporate would be in contact within 48 hours. No one was terminated. No one was blamed. Carolyn had made this point twice, carefully, which Victoria recognized as the communication style of someone who had been given specific instructions about how to handle this. By 10:30, the dining room was empty except for 2 members of the legal team, still working at the table with the document cases, and 2 people at a table near the window. Noah Stewart and Victoria Farmer. He had washed the grime from his face in the staff restroom, but he hadn't changed clothes. The torn coat was still on. The worn trousers. The boot with the device back in place. He looked, she thought, like a man who had decided that whatever he was wearing when the important thing happened was what he was going to keep wearing until the important thing was fully finished. She had brought them both water. Old habit. When you wrote the note, he said, you knew it could cost you the job. Yes. You knew what losing this job would mean. Your daughter's health care. Your brother's tuition. Yes. She looked at the table surface. I knew. Why? Victoria was quiet for a moment. She thought about her mother. About the specific weight of a deathbed promise that you don't fully understand until years later. Because there's a moment, she said finally, when you have to decide what kind of person you are. And you only really get one answer. Whatever you do in that moment, that's your answer. And you have to live with it. Noah said nothing for a long time. His fingers turned the water glass slowly on the tablecloth. You saw through me, he said. When you brought the water. You knew something was wrong. Your shoulders, she said. And your eyes. You weren't looking around the room the way someone does when they're uncertain of being there. You were assessing it. She paused. I've seen that look in people who've been responsible for something large. People who've had to be careful about rooms. You read people. It's not a gift. It's practice. She said it without apology. When you grow up in places where you don't automatically belong, you learn to read the temperature of a room before you walk in. You learn what people's faces mean before they decide to tell you. Noah nodded. He understood that kind of knowledge, not the academic kind, not the professional kind. The kind that is learned under pressure, in rooms where getting it wrong has consequences. This restaurant is going to close for 4 to 6 weeks, he said. Full renovation, full staff review, full retraining program. When it reopens, it'll need a general manager. Victoria went very still. Someone who understands what this place is supposed to be, he continued. Someone who's been on the other side of the question, who knows what it actually means to walk in here and wonder if you're going to be welcomed or assessed. He set down the water glass. Someone with a judgment to do the right thing in a room where everyone else has decided not to. You're offering me a job, she said. I'm presenting you with a choice. He said it plainly. There's a difference. Think about it. There's no timeline. No pressure. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, through the tall windows, Chicago went on doing what Chicago does. Cars and light rail and people moving through the November cold, none of them knowing what had happened here tonight. I'll think about it, she said. Chapter 12. 1 week later, a Thursday night, Victoria's phone rang at 9:15. Zoe was asleep in the next room. The apartment was quiet except for the white noise machine they used to block out the street sounds from below, and the low hum of the refrigerator, and the specific small sounds of a household managed on precision. Nothing wasted, everything counted. The bills were spread on the kitchen table in front of her. She still did this every Thursday. Organized them, went through them, ran the numbers against what she had in the account and what was coming in and what was going out. It was not a pleasant exercise. It had never been a pleasant exercise. But it was the exercise, and she'd learned long ago that the numbers did not become smaller by being avoided. The caller ID said, Stewart and Sons Hospitality, Executive Office. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Victoria Farmer? Speaking. This is Carolyn, Mr. Stewart's assistant. He asked me to reach out with a formal offer for the position of general manager at Cashin Chicago, effective upon reopening. I'm happy to go through the specifics if now is a good time. Victoria looked at the stack of bills. Go ahead, she said. The compensation package includes a base salary of, Carolyn named a number that was more than twice what Victoria had ever earned. Full benefits for you and your immediate family, including comprehensive health care with no referral requirement for specialist care. A discretionary budget for staff training and community programming. And Mr. Stewart wanted me to emphasize, this offer carries no conditions of loyalty, gratitude, or performance expectations beyond what's written into the standard management contract. You are not being rewarded. You are being hired, for specific qualifications, for a specific role. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Across the hall, Zoe made a small sound in her sleep, the soft noise she made when she was dreaming something pleasant, and then went quiet again. He drew a line between those 2 things, Victoria said. The reward and the job. He did. Why? A pause on the other end of the line. When Carolyn spoke again, her voice was slightly different, less formal, more direct. Because in his experience, people who are hired out of gratitude spend their careers trying to deserve it. People who are hired for what they're good at spend their careers doing the work. Victoria thought about that. She thought about the first restaurant she had ever worked in, at 16, in Baltimore. She thought about every room she had ever walked into and assessed before anyone assessed her. She thought about her mother's hands. About Zoe's breathing at night. About the note she had folded into a rectangle no larger than a postage stamp and pressed into the palm of a stranger. I'll take it, she said. But I have one condition. The pause on the other end was shorter this time. Tell me what it is. Victoria told her. There was silence. Then Carolyn said, I'll pass that along. I don't think there will be objections. After she hung up, Victoria sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She did not move the bills. She did not recalculate the numbers. She just sat with the quiet of the apartment and the low city sounds from below and the particular feeling of a life that has just changed direction. Then she got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check on Zoe. Chapter 13. Cashin Chicago reopened on a Friday evening in late February. The renovation had taken 6 weeks. The bones were the same, the chandeliers, the marble floors, the tall windows that looked out on the city. But the light was different. Warmer, lower, less like a stage and more like a room. The music had been changed. The tablecloths were still white linen, but the chairs were more comfortable, the spaces between tables wider. The entrance had been redesigned so that the first thing a person saw when they walked in was not a host stand positioned like a checkpoint, but an open, warmly lit welcome area with seasonal flowers and the kind of ambient warmth that said, "You are expected here." The staff training had taken 3 of the 6 weeks. Victoria had written the program herself, with input from every member of the team. It had one foundational principle, stated plainly on the first page of the handbook. Every person who walks through this door deserves to be treated as a guest. Not assessed. Not evaluated. Not managed. Welcomed. She stood near the entrance in a fitted black blazer and dark trousers, watching the first guests arrive. She had worn her hair down tonight for the first time in years. Her assistant, a 22-year-old named Jonah who had been the best busboy on the previous team and was going to be an extraordinary manager in 5 years, stood 2 steps behind her with a reservation tablet and the alert, ready posture of someone who was paying attention. The reservation list was full. The phone had not stopped for 4 days. At 7:40, the door opened and a man walked in. He was perhaps 60. His coat was thin for the weather and his boots were being held together by determination more than construction. He had the specific look of someone who has stepped into a place they believe they will shortly be asked to leave, a preemptive apology in the set of his shoulders, a readiness to retreat already built into the way he stood. Petra, the hostess, who had asked to stay and whom Victoria had given every reason to, looked up from the reservation stand and then looked toward Victoria. A question in her eyes. Victoria was already moving. "Good evening," she said, and extended her hand. "Welcome to Cashin's." The man looked at her hand and then at her face, searching, as people do, for the catch. For the moment when the welcome would turn into something else. "I don't have a reservation," he said quietly. "And I should tell you, I'm not sure I can afford." "We have a community table for guests who need it," Victoria said. "It's just beside the window. The best view in the room." She smiled, and she meant it. "Come in out of the cold." She led him to the table. She watched him sit down and look at the city through the tall window and slowly, visibly, allow himself to be somewhere he had not expected to be made welcome. When she returned to the entrance, she paused at the wall beside the host stand. A small frame had been mounted there the day before reopening. Inside the frame was a piece of paper, folded, creased, tiny, bearing cramped handwriting in blue ink. "Don't eat. The meat is spoiled. Someone did it deliberately. Get out if you can." Beneath it, a small brass plaque. This note was passed between two strangers on a Saturday night. It stopped a wrong from happening and started this place from the beginning. It hangs here to remind everyone who works here and everyone who comes here of one thing. Dignity is not a feature of the experience. It is the foundation of it. V. Farmer, General Manager. Noah Stewart had been in the back of the room since 6:15, at a corner table with a glass of water and no food ordered. He was wearing a charcoal suit and a watch that could be seen from across the room. Nobody had recognized him, because nobody was looking for him the way they had been looking for him 6 weeks ago, and because the particular camouflage of being expected was very different from the camouflage of being invisible. He had been watching Victoria work the room for 30 minutes. He had seen this before. Managers who knew the craft, managers who knew the business, managers who knew the politics. He had almost never seen a manager who knew the room the way Victoria Farmer knew this room. Not as a territory to be controlled, but as a responsibility to be honored. When she passed his table, she stopped. "You're not on the reservation list," she said. "Walk in," he said. She looked at him for a moment with a particular expression she wore when she was reading something more than the surface of a thing. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. "The room," he said, "is everything it was supposed to be." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "It always was. It just needed the right people in it." She moved on. The room filled around them both, with voices and laughter and the sounds of a place that was doing exactly what it had always been meant to do. Near the entrance, in the small frame on the wall, a piece of paper no larger than a matchbook held its place. 4 lines in cramped blue ink. "The weight of nothing. The weight of everything." The night went on.
Hello lovers and billionaires. We have come to the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, take a few seconds to like the video and drop a comment, and if you're not a part of the family yet, please subscribe and turn on notifications. This is our own little corner of the internet, so be sure to visit every day because I upload exciting, emotional, and unforgettable stories every single day, and you don't want to miss what's coming next.